Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of the Indica Books Writers Workshop with Otis. We encourage and invite people to send in their writing pieces, and every couple of weeks or so, once we have a good enough number of pieces, we have the session typically at 8 p.m. Or 8:30 p.m. India time, and Otis reviews and discusses the pieces, and we invite anyone and everyone to join in and listen and also ask their questions with respect to writing. The good thing is that the advice on writing is very practical, which also kind of makes it very difficult to put in practice at times, as you might imagine. There is no secret mantra to good writing. It is basically following obvious standard practices of good writing, but the proof that it is not so simple is that we've been doing this for over 3 years, and I think we still have some ways to go till we all get to that level of desired excellence in writing. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Otis.
Right. Okay, Abhinav, thank you. I'm not sure that there's actually, I think this idea of an arrival point is probably false. Okay, so it's a constant struggle. I mean, I like the sentences I type, but I still see that there's some perfectibility in the offing, and so I think I've quoted Hemingway many times, but a piece of writing is never finished, it's only abandoned. So I think we should keep that in mind. We should get to a point where we wish to abandon our pieces and then let them go, which does bring up another thing. I think I've talked about this some here before, but we have a number of writers who are really ready to be sending their work out. The process, as I understand it, and as I lived it, is that for a lot of years I sent my work out, and I thought I was pretty skilled, and then you collect a lot of rejections from journals and such, and that makes you once you take that hook of like, I'm actually going to try and get published in a journal, and the journals at this stage, it's harder to get published in a journal than it is to publish our own work, because we can publish our own work ourselves if we want to. But the journals still hold on to the idea that they are the gatekeepers of artistic and literary integrity, and they may or may not be wrong about that, but they do set a pretty high bar for us, and we need to do that. But the other thing we can think about is developing some venues for your published work, because I know journals in the United States. I don't know if there are journals, or if you have this kind of infrastructure already built in India. I think it would be interesting to do a little. There is some, Ashwani, or
there is some, probably not as widespread or well established as in the US, but Ashwini ji, if you can share because you had submitted a piece, right?
Yes, I have been sending out stuff to some journals here, and there are some journals in India, and there are some journals which sort of focus only on South Asian writing. So there's one in Singapore, there's one in some other places like that. And I have a list. I mean, I can share it in case somebody is willing. Otherwise, they can go to the Himalayan Writing Retreat site, and they have a list of 41 places where you can submit prose, that is fiction, short stories. And they have another list for poetry, and they have another list for submissions in Hindi, which goes to some 20 or 21. So there are lots of people there. But besides that, I also got ambitious, and I sent a mail to the New Yorker. So I don't know whether they'll publish or not, but I just felt good sending a mail and receiving. Yes, I know. and receiving a reply saying, a long reply saying that, we got your submission, but we are very busy. We'll take time. Within 90 days, you'll come to know. If you don't hear from us, that means we are not considering printing that. But anyway, I just still sent it just for the heck of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to do. I don't want to dash your hopes on the rocks of despair, Ashwani. But
no, I read a lot about it. I read a lot about the New Yorker, and still I decided to send one. Just
it's easy, and I've sent a lot of work to the New Yorker, and I've not been published there. But in the U.S. there's a lot of journals. There's a book called The Writer's Market, and I do think it would be great if Indica, or if you had some kind of collective outlet, once you know that there's some journals that want to take your work, you want to sort of recognize that. I think it would be, I don't know how you can organize to do that. Marketing, publishing my work is not my strong point at all. So I've never, I've obviously concentrated on that at times, but it's not where my heart is, because I like doing the work. But it is important to do, because we like to achieve those goals, and we like to set that bar. Yeah, I mean, I would love it too if you start tapping, some of the U.S. journals. There are journals that are not quite at the pinnacle like the New Yorker that can be more accessible, but they provide publication, and it's a great place to start. And then you start building your bona fides that you're putting elsewhere. The other thing to think about is if you can start your own journal, and then once you start a journal, to see whether you can get it affiliated with a university. These things happen, people do them. The reason you affiliate with a university is because once you establish a journal, you're going to find out that there's a lot of people writing. And then they will be sending you work, and what you need students to read it all, so that they can go through the slush pile and pick out, 20 pieces that then, an editor or a group of editors will hone down and publish. But I think it's all interesting work. It's part of the entire process. Knowing things about publishing is very helpful for writers generally. I've acted as editor, and I know that side of it. So anyway, Ashwani, I think we're going to talk about your piece first.
Okay.
Oh, Aditi, you want to ask a question?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say I'm actually working with a group of people who are focusing on launching. It's not going to be a literary journal, but it's going to be like a portal featuring writings, including literary writings from the Indian American community here. So I did want to talk to you about that, Otis, and get some of your thoughts on that. But once it's ready to go, we'll definitely reach out to this group if anyone's interested in submitting. I think that'll be a good platform.
Oh, that's great. Well, I would, I welcome talking about that. That'd be awesome. And Ashwini, if you want to, if you send me that list, I would enjoy just taking a look at it and maybe looking up some of those journals.
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
see what they look
Sure,
like.
I'll do that. And I wanted to tell Aditi that I would be very happy to, I'm very willing to contribute to her journal whenever it comes out. Another point I just wanted to say was that in America, I find that many of the writing opportunities are with journals which are actually, affiliated to some university or the other. And many of them, not many, I mean, some of them are actually run by the students of the university rather than the faculty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there are great learning opportunities. When I was at getting my PhD, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, they began a journal at that time there, and it was basically run by the graduate students. So that's, with a faculty advisor. So I mean, the creative writing infrastructure in the United States is a bit maybe overdone even. You know, there's so many workshops. I mean, this is all the workshops we were talking about, you know, the AI, but, you know, all these workshops, all this sort of routinization, you know, was happening on a human level before it reached the AI level. But, you know, I don't know if it's all a great thing, but it's just the way it is. Anyway, I would like to look at that list. I think taking a look at some of the American outlets, you know, the reviews would be a great idea, and to send some work to them. And then I think, you know, prepare yourself, you know, steel yourself for, you know, it's extremely competitive. I mean, I think we can all agree that writing is a pretty good gig. You know, you get to do it on your own. You don't have any bosses except for that demand of audience, and you work on your own schedule, and all you got to do is type. So it's great. Okay, Ashwani, let's take a look at your piece. Let's see, share screen. Tell us a little bit about this. Oh, I'm not on the right. I have to change this actually. Ashwani, there we go. Okay, Ashwani. Ashwani, okay. I should say. I'm trying to pronounce that correctly. Ashwani, tell us a bit.
How did you learn the correct pronunciation of my name?
Because I've been putting it together that the accents are not the same as the typical accents in English. So to me, what it sounds like is it's descending. So it can even feel like it speeds up towards the end. So if I just try and keep it in my mind to speed up rather than to slow down and create a little mountain. So like my tendency is to create this little mountain, but I need to just go down, go. Hurry it up. So Ashwani, yeah.
So I decided to write for a contest which was asking for speculative, paranormal, that kind of stories. So I thought, I mean, this idea came into my mind that I should write about this, about a guy who, I don't know whether I should just summarize the story. Is that what you want me to do?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's this guy who has been lumped with a writing job, which he's finding very distasteful, and he just can't get over the writer's block and is unable to do it. And then a ghost of his old, long gone teacher comes into his life and tries to convince him that he should use a ghostwriter. But he somehow balks at the idea of using a ghostwriter because it hurts his ego to do that. And he can neither get the writing work done, nor does he want to hire a ghostwriter. And in the end, when he's just about to come to his deadline, the teacher's ghost actually writes the story. And then there is a small little, humor at the end that she says, "Didn't I tell you you needed a ghostwriter?"
Right. Well, let's have you read the ending if we could.
Okay.
Just let's see if we can go like that. Yeah.
When his mobile alarm rang at 5 a.m., he dragged himself from his bed and dressed up with the intent of working at the speech again. His laptop was not on his bedside table. That was odd. He was sure he had brought his laptop into his bedroom at night after the last brief exchange with the voice. He found it on the dining table. Strangely, it stood open. He sat down and turned it on. The screen opened up on the Word document he had started typing his speech. But his opening words, "Ladies and gentlemen," now had company. 2 pages of text followed them. As he read through the text, he realized that it was the perfect speech the director could have desired. The simply worded but patently apt speech occupied the blank space that had tormented Arun for 2 days, and that he had struggled in vain to fill up. As he read through it, a giant wave of relief heaved through his chest, leaving him breathless. He sat stone still until he reached the end of the document. Resting his elbows on the table, his palms cupping his face, he stared at the screen in wonder. Could it be Mrs. V. Kumar, who was somehow responsible for the typing effort? He clasped his palms as a deep sense of gratitude pervaded his mind. What a miracle! Now he would not have to pull a sad face with the director. Who knows? The speech may gain him a couple of brownie points with the director. He stood up with folded hands and looked around, trying to guess if Mrs. V. Kumar was present in the room now to see his gratified countenance. As if waiting for her cue, she gave a brief titter and then intoned, "Arun Nagpal, didn't I tell you that you needed a ghostwriter?"
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this piece is charming, Ashwini, like all your pieces are very charming.
Thank you.
I think the the main thing I feel here, is that it doesn't, my first impression is that it doesn't go for enough. So the way I thought about this when I first started writing is that the amount of, so to think about the reader, and I don't know, it can be difficult for us, but I'm a particular kind of I'm a pretty driven person, I guess. But I thought to myself, I thought about their time is absolutely precious to them. This is what I put on my mind. And not sitting in a place, so like I had to give up a place of judgment about, well, if I think about my reader, they waste a lot of time. They're not doing things that are that important. They're on WhatsApp, too much, or they're on social media, or they simply don't do anything. They're just waiting for me to give them something to do. I had to put that all aside and think to myself that whatever someone else was doing was absolutely precious to them. Every single second and moment of their lives was precious. So when I wrote something, it would take up a certain amount of time in their lives. They would never get that time back. And that time was precious. They were giving me this precious, precious thing. I mean, to me, time is all we have. It's the most valuable thing. It's the most valuable thing. And they're giving this time over. So let's say here, let me see, I read this for 20 minutes. So in my reader, I take that 20 minutes and I value it. It's like, Ashwini, it's more precious than gold, isn't it?
Sure.
Every second of our lives is more precious than gold. Gold is absolutely valueless in comparison to our time. So once I started getting this, it was kind of a revelation for me, actually, when I stopped thinking of the reader as someone who needed me to tell them something and started really empowering and valuing the reader's time instead. And that their time was something that I was asking for. I don't know, it became a tremendous motivation for me, actually, once I started thinking about it like that. And so this story, I feel, it just doesn't go for enough. It doesn't do enough. And I could, in stories, there is a lot of this sort of formulaic stuff that I've worked out over a long period of time, because I've been like, okay, once I valued the reader's time, then it was up to me to make the most out of that time possible. How do I do that? That then led me to the next tier, which is figuring out basically what we could say is a kind of formula for stories, right? They're constructed in certain ways, and they've been constructed in certain ways over a long period of time. It can seem, now, that to me now, in thinking about it, that sense of how stories have developed and what a story is, the thing that an AI bot can then produce now, I think that that's also been sort of narrowed, and I think over time. So while it works, it's not exactly right. It's an interpretation of what stories are. It's a narrowing of it. But still, I think that there's some core elements there that are important to think about. But I want to say again that my first idea was valuing my readers' time. That was really the requirement of audience. I was saying to Abhinav that, you know, that's the you know, the holy grail. It's like once you realize that their time is you know, infinitely valuable, then you start to become a very, very dedicated taskmaster. So this story is charming, but and I look at it like this, the amount of time that I spend with it should equal what I get out of it. So my sort of it's not exactly a takeaway, because I don't believe in, like, you know, a really defined takeaway, but the experience, Aristotle will call it catharsis, the sense that you've been sort of, you know, punched in the gut and have really felt something of sort of profound significance. Again, I don't think that that is a tangible thing. It is actually an experience. So the reader reads through our story, and then they have this experience of resolution, of catharsis, of whether in tragedy or comedy, they take something away that gives them strength for the next day. It's like a kind of nourishment, right? So essentially, the time that we take should have a corresponding sense with the depth of that sort of cathartic experience that you get on the other side. And here I don't feel that I get enough of that. So it's kind of like you write wonderfully, but I want you to bring up your level so that, in a way, I thought about saying just go for more, right? Take a bigger risk. I want to say with a grain of salt, again, that there are ways that we can think of it formulaically to help us do this, to basically use a story construction to force us to go someplace that's going to be more significant. Okay, so we'll just put that aside. That's my main comment. Now, on the formulaic side, so I do have my personal objections to the idea that, you know, a bot can simply construct a story and then churn it out. And so I have been thinking a lot about it. I don't do any social media. I don't really have any contact with the outside world because I'm really concentrated on my work, and I read the things that I need for my work, etc. So my partner Zandi told me about the AI, right? So I didn't even really know. She told me that I'd actually heard from another friend too, because he works in the movies. He's like, oh yeah, all the work is stopped because the writers are on strike. I was like, the writers are on strike? Why? And he says, well, because they're getting AI to write the scripts. And I was like, and they're striking for that? You know what? They should have not been writing stories that can be written by computers, and then they would not be. I mean, it's the writer's fault, of course, that they're writing stories that can be written by computers. They became computers first, right? And then the computer simply took over. I have no sympathy. I have no sympathy. So, but we can and should still use some of these ideas. The main idea that you need to think about is when we have a point of view character, what is their issue? What is their core issue? It's sort of like the fatal flaw. Then we want to think of an antagonist that is diametrically opposed to our protagonist. So stories are not about characters being successful. Stories are about characters being unsuccessful. Your character here, right, is not writing this piece. We don't really probe what his issue is with doing that. His anti-authoritarianism, which I know, Ashwini, you have. You know, I know that you know that, that was a joke. I don't know. But this, whatever the core issue, right, the antagonist finally has to be a kind of attacking, right? And the story moves towards some kind of revelation about the protagonist. The protagonist is under fire. If we look at this story, actually, the protagonist gets off scot-free. When a protagonist has a problem, and every protagonist does, and I'm going to say, without seeming like I can speak universally, everybody does. We all have some issue. Issues are universal to us all. But that when that character is allowed to go through a story and not examine their problem, we actually have a name for that, which is imitative fallacy. Because the point of a story is that the protagonist does confront their fatal flaw. That's what makes it a story. So the idea being, and I'm giving you some very, very boilerplate stuff here, I will again recognize. But the idea of story is that in a story, a protagonist confronts they have a dark night of the soul, as is said, and they go through that experience. They walk through the valley of death, however we want to think of it, and they rise out of it either in triumph or they go down tragically. So that's, if they rise up in triumph, it's comedy. If they go down with the ship, it's tragedy. But that's what makes it a story and what makes it different than life, because in life, that simply doesn't happen. Right? So the thing that elevates a story, what makes a story versus what makes just life generally, is that this confrontation takes place. So the things that happen in the story have something on the other side as an outcome, basically. The revelation, the feeling of catharsis in the reader. So the revelation creates the feeling of catharsis. So that's the point. It doesn't matter what the revelation is. The revelation is not important in itself, but that it come after a period of struggle creates catharsis in the reader. That's what makes it a story, versus what regular life is. It simply doesn't have that. So I want to say this is a little critical of normal life. The story idea is critical of normal life, but in normal life, the story will tell us the character has some kind of flaw. They never investigate it. They're never forced by an antagonistic force to have a dark night of the soul, but instead they just coast through, basically in a kind of delusionality, right? Because they never confront what their major issue is. The thing that goes along with this is something that I heard a long time ago and that I've also always applied. That all of our characters are consistent in this one way. They do not want to change. So my young writer self took that on, and I said, I feel that that's true. I think that that's true of characters. The one thing that's absolutely consistent among everyone on earth is that we don't want to change. Which means what the story does is essentially that antagonistic force comes in and obligates change. The plot of the story forces the character to change. When we don't, I'm returning to imitative fallacy, when we don't do that, it's imitative fallacy because we're saying that we have a story, but actually we're imitating real life. The character doesn't change. So we announce to everyone we have a story, but instead what we do is we depict actual life. Does that make sense? It's kind of just conceptual, right? And I'm not even going to say that it's absolutely true. It is a narrow vision of what's going on. Absolutely. That's how I feel now. But that narrow vision I took on when I was a young writer for sure. And I was like, okay, I want to write stories because I want to be published and I want to make my career happen. So I'm going to take all of this information that I'm hearing and I'm going to try my best to apply it. I've still had trouble with that because I have not adopted, the mantle of hack writing, which is what, a lot of movie writers do and what the bots are going to do. It's hack writing. That's what they're going to be, a bunch of hacks. I didn't take to that very well, but I have learned the lessons of the hack. I had one of my mentors, Bill Harrison, said, you have to know what a hack knows. You're a literary writer, but you have to know what a hack knows. You have to know these basic formulas, and then you have to try and do something better than that. But the base formula is the minimum standard. So I know with Sri Charan, I'm gonna give him similar advice about this.
Otis, can we have Jay's piece go next?
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's even the order. Oh, Jay, you got to run, I think.
Yeah, Otis.
Hey, congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much.
I didn't know about it, but I'll start checking my mail. Or the book. Okay, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Okay, let me finish up with Ashwini. So we can save ourselves some time. Ashwini, you are a writer after my own heart. I love writing. I love imagining things. I mean, it becomes difficult to recognize that I love typing. I love living in my imaginary world. I'm completely happy there. I'm a recluse, right, in just this place, and I type along, and it's wonderful. But if we know that our standard is to reach this audience, to value their time and give them something afterwards, we might do what we call pre-writing, to write to kind of think and ruminate a little bit about what we're constructing in order to, it's so that we have an economy of our time. So we don't have to write a whole piece that ends up being imitative fallacy, doesn't engage in this sort of dynamic story construction that we know exists and we even know works. Rather than spending our time doing that, valuing our time also, go ahead and ratchet it up right from the start and say, okay, I have a protagonist. Who's my antagonist? What's the antagonistic force? And what are going to be the series of struggling events that are going to lead to either the character rising, the comic ending, rising and ascending, everything works out basically, or tragically not ascending, but the reader takes from that moment of choice, basically, and they say, even if the character goes down with the ship, the reader says, I would have chosen a different path, and they ascend. So the reader ascends no matter what. Ashwini, that's my comment on this piece. You're a wonderful writer, and I think that if you, maybe it's a little bit why I'm saying too, talking about the journals and sending work out, to set that bar a little higher. But for me, the bar is the reader's time. Once we start recognizing that the reader's life, that their time is absolutely and infinitely precious, and we work in service of that time and their experience, then I believe that we raise our bar.
Thank you, Otis. You've given me a lot to think about.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have, so, I mean, you also, I see it as it's a little bit of a curse, Ashwini. You write wonderful sentences. You've already been given that. You have a wonderful sensibility. So you have to rise to this other level. That's the obligation. I, on the other hand, I had none of those gifts. I didn't come in with anything. So it would have been fine if I had just become a lawyer, you know? Everyone would have been fine with that. But that's not what you have. So I'm sorry.
That's very motivating for me. Thank you.
Jay, let's look at your piece. Tell us a little bit about this.
So this is about a character who comes outside a bookstore, and only when she sees that there's a queue waiting outside the bookstore, she tries to find out what it's all about, because she's following the path of a dog which joins the queue. So she sees somebody ahead of the dog, so she wants to join the queue just to find out, because she believes that she has nothing better to do. And only when she gets to the end of the queue and she starts talking to the character which is standing ahead of the dog, does she realize that none of them are actual human beings, but actually characters that are being written in or written out of books. And so the store has two lines waiting outside it, one line trying to get in order to fall into a story, fall out of a story, and another line getting out of the store, which is falling into a story. So as writers write characters, these characters leave the store, enter the real world, and they live the lives that the writers are writing for them. And as their relevance in the story comes to an end, they come again to the to the door of the store, enter the store, and in between the lines around.
Right.
I was trying to use this as a larger metaphor for life itself, where people enter and exit the world depending on if they have some relevance in it or not.
Jay, I got that.
And the creator is the writer who writes them in or out of.
Yeah, I got that. I mean, in a sense, all of our stories, of course, are metaphors, right? Because they are these inventions. Yeah, let's have you read to the ending here.
Okay. So you're saying that our story is over, that we're going to die? Oh, no, dear, not at all. There is no death and birth here. Our lives are infinite. We just fall in between the lines, as it were. So once I go into the store, that's it. I will drop between the lines. Maybe, or perhaps by the time you get there, your character suddenly gets a new exit the store through that line. Why are we going in so slow then? Why not just flood inside and be done with it? Oh, no. You don't want to rush things, dear. Haven't you noticed that even as you stood, your clothes changed colors and your hair has grown beyond your shoulders? Your story continues to be written, even if it seems to be nearing its end, which is why you ended up in this line in the first place. But don't forget, the moving hand writes and continues to write. And as it does, just one second, as it does, our lives go on, always changing, but going on, until we are no longer needed for the story. And again, maybe we'll be needed in another story, so we will be written in between the lines. And then we will walk out of the store for yet another journey. So this is how it will be. This is how it has been and will always be. Enjoy the moment that you're in now. In fact, here, pet this dog. Perhaps it will take you to where you're meant to be. Rekha looked at the lady, at the old man behind her, the lines leading into and out of the store, and at the dog that had taken a fascination to her ankles. She bent down to pet the dog.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, with this piece, it is a little bit philosophical, and Jay, you do lean a little bit towards the philosophical, I think. I think the thing that I was thinking about the most here was that how can this become a more unique version? I mean, this idea that obviously this idea that we are moving through a kind of story of our lives that's not really in our control, right? I mean, that's been long-standing. In fact, you even the moving hand writes and continues to write. That sounds very much like this quote, and I want to think that it's a Persian poet who wrote it, and I know that it was used by Martin Luther King Jr. But anyway, there's quite a famous line about, you know, the hand that writes continues to write.
I think that is the moving hand writes and having writ moves on. Not all thy piety and all thy thing can make it change even a word.
Who is that?
Or something like that. How is that?
I think that was pretty good. Yeah, so I recognize that. I recognize that line. I actually just read it. I just sort of delved into it maybe a couple of weeks ago when I was looking at Martin Luther King Jr. A bit and one of his speeches. So we do know this idea, and you know, the other thing to realize when we're writing is, you know, we could say to Ashwini, it's like our audience we know is going to be a literary audience. So when we write literature, our audience is already, you know, they're already reading literature. They would not pick up our work otherwise. So we can think to ourselves that the standard, this is another thing that I also brought in, along with the reader's time being absolutely precious and valuable. This is the other thing I brought in. So I'm not some, you know, great person that's, you know, been given the job of teaching these, you know, this group of ignoramuses. You know, I'm instead the person who's like really valuing their time, and I want to give them something, right? This gift. But they're already literary writers. And so the other thing that was motivating to me was I'm asking them to read my work and not everything else that's already been written, Jay. Right? So when it's like, okay, I'm asking them to read my work and not read Hamlet. Okay? Forget Hamlet, I'm announcing, forget Hamlet. I could just write a note to everybody saying, why don't you read Hamlet? Right? But I don't do that. Please read Hamlet instead of this story. No, I don't do that. I say, read my story. So I want to take their time to read my work. So I set the bar at doing more, or doing the minimum. Okay, so this is going back to hack writing. Ezra Pound said, make it new. That's basically the mantra of a hack, right? I mean, all you got to do, you take the old thing and you just reconfigure it, and there you go. Push it out there. So you're actually not trying to raise the bar. You're not trying to do anything that's actually new. You're only regurgitating. I don't like that word, but I don't know why. But anyway, you're just refashioning it. And I will point out that Ezra Pound ended up being, you know, a fascist propagandist for Mussolini. So we'll just, you know, put that to the side. So calls into question a little bit. So here, I like this story, but what I wanted you to do is to take it on even more so. Like, to show the difficulty of this idea that we're being written, but this other thing that we sort of recognize is the human spirit to manifest a free will if we want, right? Because isn't that the conflict between this sort of a kind of divine? We can think of it as a divine narration, or we can think of it as a literary narration. We can think about it in a lot of different ways, versus the individual's desire and the way that they push up against that. And so I think that this story, you know, essentially works. I enjoyed it, but I wanted it to have greater specificity. Does that make any sense? Like, I want your main character, you you know, you talk about like the way she looks, he or she, I think a she.
It's a she, yeah.
Yeah, the way she looks, even the environment around her, I feel like you could do more with that, right? And the place I first felt it was when we look at the group of characters. Well, for one, in our story construction, she doesn't really commit. She just says, "I'm not doing much anyway," right? It's not as if she's compelled, right? You might think about like, what is her spirit? What is her will? Here, she's actually just kind of passive. She's like, "I'm not doing anything. I might as well stand over here." That doesn't ring true to me, right? I think it's another thing. You know, out of my tremendous scrutiny of what a story is and even what our characters are. So, as a writer, I think a lot about our characters, which is a way to reflect upon myself. Like this tableau that you've developed here, I mean, I think about it all the time. I think about it all the time because I see that I am taking this position of narrator. I'm narrating for my characters, but that also makes me realize that, of course, someone must be narrating for me. I don't think of myself as a person who just goes and stands on a line, though. So
no, what I originally had was her cell phone rang. It was a friend who she was about to meet, and she looked ahead and she saw that friend outside another shop about 100 meters ahead of her, and then she suddenly decided that she no longer wanted to meet this friend, and to avoid that, she crossed the road and stood in the line was what I wrote. Then I removed those couple of paragraphs because it took me to 2,000 words and that was too much. So I removed those and I changed it to not like I have much to do anyway.
Right. Well, all I'm really suggesting is that you really kind of grapple with this issue of the character's will. So the character, to think about this universally, think about it in yourself and everyone else simultaneously. We're all the same in this, that our human will is a force that exists, whether it's the will to cross the street or the will to sit down and write a story or the will to do anything that we do. Remember, this kind of goes hand in hand with our life being precious. Our life is precious and we're always expressing our will. To think about your central character as a person who's doing that, who's not passively, we might think that people are passively involved in their lives. And we should think about that.
Okay.
But they're not completely passive about their lives. I don't think so. And our characters aren't either. And what we want to find when we really drop into our characters is what is motivating them. Once we start to think about what our character is, what is motivating our character, we actually, I think, automatically start to develop a conflict with this idea of our lives being simply narrated and we're just passive expressions of that narration. Because our motivation is in conflict with that. Because we want things. I think they're all interesting problems, but my hope for this piece is I think it's good, but I think it could raise a level if you start to develop the specificity of both your central character as it maybe develops throughout this entire piece, and maybe the specificity of, there's a certain point where you mention, where are they? Where are you? You basically mentioned to other people that, oh yeah, here, there were all sorts of people.
Yeah, what I was trying to say is that we're exiting the line coming out of the shop. And then I said that these are archetypes that are still being written. And right now they are still archetypes. And as they continue to be written, they'll evolve into full-fledged characters. Right now they're just archetypes. There's a friendly dog. There's a man who's who's standing in his overalls.
Right. And so, let me say first, I want these characters, like all our characters in all our stories, develop with greater specificity. Jay, it is, and it's true for me in relationship to all the work I get from Indic, right? To me, you have experiences and knowledge of a world that let's be frank, I may never see. So I'm a very jealous reader. I have a lot of requirements, right? And I want to know your world, and your vision and your capacity. I want to see it reflected on the page so I can travel into it. That's just my selfish desire. I want to recognize that in myself. But the second thing is, as a reader, as let's say, call me a generic reader, just a human being, I don't want to read archetypes. I don't want to read generic characters, because I do not want to think that I'm a generic character and just call me, obstinate, but I don't. I'm going to have trouble identifying with these generic characters, because that forces me to see how I too am a generic character. I'm not saying that that's not true, Jay. I may be, but I don't like it.
Okay.
I don't like it. But when I see a character being offered with this kind of sense of specificity, right, I get to have, the way I think of it is, the reader's relationship with the story is this, it's the best of both worlds. I get to have the struggle, difficulty, and tension of life while feeling that I'm safe in relationship to it. So that means that what I do is, as a reader, I feel the universal feelings of my characters, but I also recognize that I am not that character. For that to happen, this character has to be specific. These characters are just like me. So now what I'm getting is like, oh my God, my life is simply being written. And I don't like that, because it makes me feel a little out of control.
Okay.
So I want to see these specific characters going through these issues. And I think there's a lot you can play with, because as your main character looks around, she sees her story. What is her story, right? As she looks at these other characters, who does she see? And in a sense, by seeing them, she should also see their stories. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity to think about the way these story universes actually work. So there's a lot that you can do here that would be really interesting. And yes, maybe the philosophy is something I've seen before, but I have not seen your particular expression of it. And it's in those details and that vision that I'm really going to be getting something that's going to be new for me. That's a big, long speech. I think the bones are here, but I do think that you need to ratchet it up.
Okay.
And again, I just beg everyone, you know a world that I don't know, and I think every reader is like this. I mean, I'm hoping to have readers that want to read my world who have not experienced it, right? Because that's something that they get, that's like extra. And I really would like to see some of the world that you know that, again, I mean, sadly, I may never know. I will only know through your writing. So please put it on the page.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Jay.
Otis,
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I also wanted to tell you that, my first book got published recently, earlier in January. It's a commentary on a set of poems written in the 9th century. It's a commentary in English, but it is written in the form of a conversation between a set of girls who are performing a fast for 30 days. It's also it's a coffee table book because it has about 100 paintings that go along with the text and complement the text. And the book has about 100 references from older works. So it's a it's a fiction, non-fiction kind of a thing that's mixed up, because the book itself is a commentary, and therefore it touches upon theological and philosophical concepts that are in the original set of poems. But it is written in the form of a conversation, and it also has text that complements the painting. So it's kind of a hybrid that way. and it's doing good, doing well in the market. So
Yeah, well, is there any way you can push my address here in the United States to your publisher so that I might see a copy?
let me see how I can work that out. And I'll also get the details from Abhinav and I'll work it out.
Yeah, I mean, I really look forward to seeing it.
Great. Thank you, Otis.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Sri Charan, let's look at your work.
Yeah, hi Otis.
Okay, Sri Charan, tell me a little bit about this story.
Okay, so the story is a second chapter in my novel which I am working upon. So the story is about a character who kind of hears a conspiracy going on to kill a king of a particular kingdom and tries to stop that, but fails anyway. But you did not see any of that, what is going on in this short piece, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, you already saw the first chapter, I think, before of this, like between two people conversing on the bank of a river. If you remember that story.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not latching onto it right this moment.
Yeah, both are independent. Like you can read independently.
Oh, okay. Let's have you read the opening here. The first page.
From the beginning? Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The drunk prince, as Vasava fashioned himself, strolled through the city of the flowers in the morning, moving from one pleasure house to the other. He would not touch the ladies, of course, or rather, they would not let him. The street of the flowers was for those who shaved themselves daily and spent coins like they were grown on trees. For the likes of the drunk prince, there was the northern valley on the other side of the capital. He would rather spend time in the dragged part of the city than the pleasure houses that smelt of spiced perfumes from the outside. But the inside of these pleasure houses was the source of juicy tidbits that provided him his bread. The news he had collected since this morning was of mundane nature that might only serve as lewd talk in the inns and for the boat crowns. Lord Chandrakranta had visited the central brothel today, very early before dawn, and engaged in an intellectual poetry recitation with the young Jasmine, as she was called there, before bedding her. This was told to him by the beggar at the door, who had overheard the Jasmine confiding this to her companion at the window. Vasava did not doubt the part of the Lord visiting and bedding her, but he was sure that the poetry recital had not happened. He had reservations about the scholarly prowess of the Jasmine, but he very much doubted if Lord Chandrakranta could even read, let alone recite poetry. The beggar also confirmed this when he told him that the Lord had not been there very long, and remarked in his own words, stayed only as long as I chewed and spat my better leaf out.
Okay, great. Sri Charan, this story demonstrates a lot of your strengths that you display continuously. The dropping into a world that I feel like you completely realize. Maybe do you mind? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. Like what is your sort of process to kind of drop into these worlds? What is it that happens?
I can't tell that exactly, but it comes while in the process of writing itself. I would not imagine initially. I'll have some plot going on, but I would not imagine the world initially. Like it comes while writing. At some point, at the end of a sentence, it comes. Maybe something should be here, or some part of culture should be here, like that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't explain it exactly.
What it can feel like on my side is that you you have this, you have this tremendous facility of imagination, but at the same time, you continue to contain it a little bit, I mean, it's like going a rabbit down the hole, right? So this sort of imaginative process takes place, but there's still this kind of forward movement, and maybe you get that a little bit just from the physicality. You have the drunk prince going from place to place, so you're thinking about that sort of that bit of drive. So there's a drive there, but at the same time, it's like it's so easily inventive. I mean, I think that this paragraph here is a good demonstration. You have this lord, you have this person who's kind of an information hound. He uses his information in various ways. One imagines, he hears this story and then allows you to tell this story about the poetry recital, but then your main character doesn't really believe it. It's partly because of the jasmine, but then also partly because of the Lord, that he's not even capable of, he's not even literate. It's just kind of wonderful the way it moves along, and I read it with interest. You have the strength that we know. I believe that you can even anticipate what I'm going to say now. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, maybe I was elongating it or delaying the exact plot which has to come, like delaying the conflict, maybe.
Yeah, well, yes, that is exactly right. So the same thing I was saying to Ashwini, another way that for me, I simplify these things because for me, I get lost in my imagination. And so I've tended to simplify things, and then I teach those simple things because they're useful to me to remember them. I mean, we almost need, we need to write it up on our computer. What's the conflict? I think I've told you this story before about the first time I took a story to this professional writer, and he said, in the margins, he kept writing, "Where's the story? Where's the story?" And on page 9, he said, "This meanders like a drunk on a bender." That echoes a little bit with this story, doesn't it? This meanders a little bit like a drunk on a bender. And we even have the piece titled that, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
That deeply offended me when I heard that, but I tried to be like, I took that. His name, the author was Barry Hannah, and Barry Hannah became this little parrot on my shoulder saying, "Where's the story, Otis? Where's the story?" That was a provocative question for me. Where was the story? The conflict, exactly. And that's the conflict between the protagonist and the antagonistic force. The conflict between the protagonist and the antagonistic force is constructed, as you rightly say, in the plot. I think it bears saying again, that's the plot. The antagonistic force is the plot. This character is going through, we talked, with Ashwini, we were talking about imitative fallacy. In real life, as we see it as storytellers, in real life, what happens is the character goes through life and they're never confronted by the plot. And they exit. They come in and they exit. But in a story, what happens, the character is moving through and the plot, the force of antagonism confronts them early on. We want that to happen early so that the reader is going to wonder what's going to happen. They know immediately that they're involved in a story. They're not involved in simply a drunk meandering on a bender. Is that what he said? I think so. So, and that, because there's a conflict, that makes it a story. And what that means is this character is coming along and instead of nothing happening, they're up here in a land of story. And I'm going to say this vaguely, but I mean it with all due reverence. Something is going to happen. That's what a story is. A story is about something happening. It's not about nothing happening. It's about something happening. We are delusional as human beings, it seems. We're constantly delusional. We will always think that this is a competition and that someone's going to win. And so that's what we think, just like a cricket match, right? We're like, oh, here's a conflict. These two teams are entering the field, and we're gonna end up with a victory of one over the other. So that's the way the reader always begins because of this conflict. But what happens is instead is that we resolve the issues of character going in. Every character, I used to think of it this way, every character has their plot, and a story has them come like this. This is the conflict. Tritron, I know you don't need this, but I'm going to emphasize it. You know me, I'm thoroughly brutal when it comes to my re-emphasis. But so a conflict requires two things. One thing is not a conflict. Two things. And so we need to get those on the page. Where's the story?
Well, kind of. It's not there yet.
It's, you know, that I am going to tell you that when Barry Hanna said that to me, I was 30 years old. I'd been teaching high school for 7 years. So I was already, and I've been teaching English, and I thought I knew everything about writing. And then this guy, and he was a little guy, and he was, there's a lot about him I did not like. I did not like him having good lines at my expense. But when he said, where's the story? And what I thought, that was a serious problem. He was my antagonist because I was a person who wanted to write stories that people wanted to read. That's what I wanted. So I'm trying to get that, and then he's coming and saying, where's the story? He's telling me I'm not even writing a story. I'm saying I want to write stories, and he's telling me I'm not doing it. So that was a dark night of the soul for me. And this is absolutely a true story. Out of that, in that little conflict with Barry Hanna, I wrote a story in 2 days. It was a week-long workshop. I wrote it in 2 days, and I said, well, damn you, Barry Hanna. I am going to write a simple, stupid story just like you want, is what I said to myself. And it was out of that animosity and anger at Barry Hanna that I wrote the story that got me into an MFA program at Arkansas. And from there, I went to Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. I wrote a story. It was 7 pages long. I'm like, you want to see a stupid story about blah, 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 I'll show you. And I came up with a character who I thought was interesting, and I discovered what I thought was their force of antagonism, and I put them together, and I wrote a 7-page story that got me into a graduate writing program. So I clearly have not made you angry enough yet, Tritron.
Well, not that angry, I guess. Not as much as you had on your.
Well, I think I need to work on that.
Maybe.
You have this, you know, Haschemyer has also been cursed with this, you know, these sentences. I don't know if you're cursed really with the sentences of Haschemyer, but you are cursed with this imaginative capacity. It's a responsibility, but it's a very hard thing to curtail. It does not want to be curtailed, and it does not want to be told what to do. That is for sure. So you have to also be the person who tells it what to do. You have to take this fabulous base that you have, this imaginative capacity, and you must overlay this thing that you do not want. Just, you think I wanted Barry Hannah to tell me that I wasn't writing a story? I was 30 years old. Writing a story and being a writer was going to save my life. And then I had this person telling me that I was failing at it. I was not happy. We don't like it. But not everything, you know, the things that are best for us are not necessarily things we like.
Yes.
I mean, that is what the antagonistic force is. It's actually that teacher you don't want, right? If the character wants to go through life not changing, they certainly don't want to meet this conflict. They do not want to meet the Barry Hannah of their soul. They don't. But the plot drives them in that way, and it is not pretty. I always enjoy your work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Otis. I mean, you have told me this many times, I think, but it just keeps rolling like that. I'll try to curtail and work on it.
Well, you know, one of the things that helped me with Barry Hannah is that I was in a workshop and I was around other people, and it humiliated me to have Barry Hannah say, "Where's the story?" And it humiliated me when he read in front of other people that my story that I thought was essentially a work of genius. I will admit, it's the last work of genius I ever wrote. It was a work of genius.
Okay.
The last one I wrote, he said, meandered like a drunk on a bender. So I did not want to be, I had to hand in another story to be workshopped later that week, or maybe it was a 2-week program for the next week. I'd never been in a creative writing workshop before. I was going there purposely to find out whether I could deal with criticism or not, because I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to leave the situation I was in and do something else. And that was my way to do that. I did not want to be humiliated again by Barry Hannah. Maybe you need to look for something like that.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Always enjoyable. Great to see you all. Pranshu, hi. Ram, nice to see you. Abhinav, I think that's...
And that's a wrap, I think. We've covered the 3 pieces that you had. Folks, we will not meet next weekend, but we'll try and meet the weekend after that if we get enough pieces. If not, then we'll meet in March, the first week of March. But please do send in the pieces, and in a couple of days, this recording should be available, and I'll get this put up on YouTube, and I'll send out the link.
Okay. Thank you.
Till then, thank you, folks. Bye.
Thank you.